Zev's job is to work PR for prisoners on a game show where they'll most likely die a horrible death while an uncaring galaxy watches. If that's not bad enough, she's saddled with the two most unmanageable, chaotic, and difficult crawlers that the show has ever had. They're also the two most popular. Zev is a Kua-Tin. They're a fish-like species who make up the Borant Corporation, the company who is running the Earth season of Dungeon Crawler World. Borant is a failing company, and Zev sits real low in their hierarchy. She works for the communications department and is assigned to the royal court of Princess Donut, or more simply, Donut and Carl. They get linked up before anyone knows the extent of trouble that this unlikely pair would be causing. Zev's job is supposed to be simple: manage interviews, sponsors, their image, basically their story. The drama behind the action. It looks like her job would be made all the easier given Donut's desire to be in the spotlight and how good she is at it. That, along with the fact that her dungeon build gives her exceptionally high charisma. Zev's trying her best to do right by Borant, but warms up to Donut straight away. Given that Borant had been mining Earth for content for the crawl for so long, Zev is well versed in pop culture. She loves a lot of the same things as Donut, namely Gossip Girl. Her getting along with her clients should not be a detriment to her job. It's risky for her since the idea is that her clients will die, but Carl and Donut prove themselves to be an exception. It turns out managing Carl and Donut, let's be honest, mostly because of Carl, is more damage control than public relations. Zev proves that she's actually good at her job early on. She gives Carl some really solid advice. Zev is corporate and Carl is, well, he's Carl. She pushes him toward making choices that would play really well for the audience, like a more exciting weapon than a slingshot, for instance. Her advice is practical, executable, and brand conscious. To be fair, Carl does eventually cave on the slingshot, but that just proves that he's not defiant toward her for the sake of being defiant. Carl ignores her repeatedly, and despite him ignoring her sound advice, he is succeeding by every metric in the overly measured dungeon format. He's even winning in metrics that the normal crawl doesn't measure, as he pokes the power players of the real galaxy in the eye over and over. Him ignoring her advice doesn't discount her. She's absolutely correct in her approach in general terms, but she's wrong about it in relation to Carl and Donut. Even with them not taking Zev's advice most of the time, hearing from her is a breath of fresh air. If nothing else, it's a friendly voice coming from the outside. A friend for Donut, an ally for Carl. Given her closeness to the two, her work style begins to shift as she starts working for the client rather than the crawl, or Borant. The powers that be behind the crawl don't like this closeness and the friend over manager approach. They really don't like Zev sharing information beyond basic dungeon-related PR work. By the end of the fourth floor, Zev is abruptly replaced. The first story that our heroes are fed is that there was a personal tragedy back home. They see through this lie pretty quick before learning that she was sent to a re-education retreat, which should sound incredibly ominous to you. She's replaced with another Kua-Tin. Loida's also an employee of Borant, but also part of the system's ruling ultra-nationalist party, the Bloom. Loida saw the opening to get this assignment when Katya Grimm joins the royal court of Princess Donut. Katya was technically a client of Loida's already. This pitch, along with the growing unrest in the Borant system, led to Zev's removal. This is the classic dungeon crawler Carl twist. Zev is a friend, someone who brings comfort to Carl and Donut from outside the dungeon. That's rare for them. They, and us as the audience, get a liking for Zev. She fills in a lot of information on the business side of the dungeon, with it feeling organic in the story and not like an exposition dump that stops the story entirely. All at once, that happy presence is gone with no indication if we'd ever hear from her again. As fun as the stories can be at times, these sharp diversions into gut punches and heart-wrenching are why these books really shine. As much as Carl ignored Zev, it was never contentious. He thinks of her as a friend too. The dungeon taking her away from him irritates him. The dungeon taking her away from Donut infuriates him. Carl comes up with one of his wild Carl plans that feels nearly impossible for it to work out, with repercussions, and those repercussions meaning death. But he is stuck in an alien game show where he's also expected to die, so it doesn't seem like much of a punishment. Before Loida's death, Zev was brought back in, but with a very diminished role. Social media only. She's very different after her re-education, which gives you a really good idea of what that experience was like. Everything she says is calculated. She keeps her distance from Donut, careful not to be caught being too friendly. This version of Zev isn't the fun breath of fresh air from outside the dungeon. Now it's a shell of a friend who only brings tension. Another warning that the dungeon has consequences for everyone, inside or outside. Despite Zev now being careful of her corporate overlords, her arc really starts to take shape here. As the story continues, Zev starts to show a bit more independence. Her role is more than just a scared woman doing her job. She works within the bounds of her job to manage the information that gets to her clients in ways that would benefit the personal goals rather than her corporate ones. She does this through speaking in code to Donut. They talk about Gossip Girl, so the system thinks it's just the same idle nonsense as before. But they bring up things only fans of the show would know, and I had to confirm these things for myself because I am not included in that group. One example is Donut asking about characters and Zev choosing Ivy, who, on Gossip Girl, is a character who pretends to be someone else. This lets them know that Zev is still in there and what she's presenting is an act. She also uses the tech of the social media board. She gives away substantial strategic intelligence buried inside outraged party loyalist messages on their message boards. To her bosses, it looks like spam, but Carl and Donut know what to look for. She also jumps in to interrupt the crawlers with PR scheduling updates that are never as urgent as it seems, as a means to stop them from saying too much. For example, Carl almost says something very dangerous for him during a Donut panic attack, and she heads it off, cutting it off clean. It's made clear to these crawlers early on the second floor in Carl and Donut's case, that attempted violence against an admin would end in execution. As the crawl goes on, part of the PR for crawlers is merchandising. A company wants to sell a robotic donut toy with her catchphrases. The company makes a cheap, crappy version that kind of says some donut stuff, but mostly takes stuff from the Garfield comic strip. Because of the shoddy construction, Carl is able to set up an exploit where the toy would become a bomb. It takes a very delicate touch to get it set just right. He uses this trick when he and Donut are taken out of the crawl for a publicity appearance, which is a rare time when Loida would physically be present with them. The exploit works, and Loida is killed. This little trap is made all the sweeter because it was Loida herself who insisted the toy have a self-destruct mechanism. She did not want Carl to be able to get to the internal mechanisms. Carl even warns her of the danger because the toy is, presumably, intended to be sold to kids. Carl gets away with it because nobody can prove intent. A syndicate liaison named Oren, basically an intimidating alien vice principal, investigates and reconstructs almost exactly what happened. But Carl will not sign a confession, and there's no hard proof. Oren basically tells him that he's lucky that he's worth so much money to the Kua-Tin, or he'd already be dead. It's all about the bottom line. After Loida's death, Zev is reinstated for her full role. Continuing on with the series, Borant is getting desperate. Donut works with Zev through the cover of social media to smuggle Valte brainworms into the top levels of Borant. The resistance movement this supports is called the Borant Emancipation Front. This directly leads to their downfall. Zev works for Borant, so that's not great for her, but it does allow her a bit of a longer leash. The problem may be going from bad to worse for her, since the more Borant falls apart, the more unstable the system's AI seems to get. The AI is crazy and increasingly violent. With Zev being allowed to get closer to Carl and Donut, it means that she's closer to ground zero if things go real bad for them. With Borant all but out of the picture, it's looking precarious for Zev. It's great for Carl and Donut having her on board, but with everything they have to deal with, not to mention being trapped in the dungeon, they can only do so much for her. I'm hoping for the best for Zev. She went from a low-level corporate worker to someone seeking independence and freedom from an oppressive corporation as she chooses who is worthy of her help. It's a product of the dungeon working as it should, but not the way that the creators intended. Check out this video next for more Dungeon Crawler Carl Explained. See you on the next floor.